First it was storming me, then it was storming her. Now in more detail. My name's Daniel, 38M, and until a month ago, I thought I had the kind of life people envy. I married my wife, Melanie, 36F, 10 years ago. We met at a charity gala, where she was volunteering and effortlessly charming everyone in the room. I was smitten immediately. Over the years, I prided myself on how well we worked as a team, me running my tech startup, her organizing events for the local arts community. Life seemed good. We had a modest but comfortable house, 2 adorable dogs, and a group of friends we hosted dinner parties for almost every month. I was the guy who thought he had it all. A smart, gorgeous wife, financial stability, and a peaceful routine. But looking back now, I can see how it started to unravel. It was small at first, barely noticeable. Melanie started taking more me time, often claiming she needed space to recharge from her demanding job. I didn't think much of it. I figured everyone needs a break. She'd go out in the evenings, usually saying she was meeting friends or attending some networking event. Then there were the little things. She started getting secretive about her phone, tilting it away when a message came in. Packages would arrive addressed to her, and when I asked what they were, she'd wave it off as boring work stuff. Our shared credit card showed a string of charges that didn't make sense. Luxury lingerie, boutique wine deliveries, even a hefty subscription to something labeled Venus Social. When I asked about it, she brushed it off, saying it was gifted through work perks. Melanie grew distant in bed, too, coming up with excuse after excuse to avoid intimacy. Stress, she'd say, or, I'm not feeling well. I tried to be patient, supportive, but the nagging feeling wouldn't go away. I found myself lying awake at night, wondering where the spark went. I was the last person to jump to conclusions, though. I wanted to believe we were just in a slump. Every couple has them, right? I told myself things would go back to normal once her work slowed down or once we took that anniversary trip we'd been planning for months. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. And as much as I tried to ignore it, the signs kept piling up. Little did I know I was standing on the edge of a cliff, and the drop was coming fast. It was a Wednesday night when the first undeniable crack appeared in our perfect life. Melanie had left the house around 6 p.m., saying she had an important networking dinner to attend. I'd barely gotten home from work when she rushed out the door in a sleek black dress I didn't recognize, paired with heels that made her look like she'd stepped off the cover of a magazine. "Don't wait up," she said with a quick peck on my cheek, grabbing her coat. By 10 p.m., I was restless. I sat on the couch, mindlessly flipping through channels, trying to ignore the nagging voice in my head. Where was she? Why hadn't she texted me? It wasn't like Melanie to go completely silent. Normally, she'd at least send a quick message to check in or say she'd be late. By 11:30 p.m., I couldn't sit still anymore. I opened our shared credit card app and scrolled through the recent charges, something I hadn't done in weeks. The last one, from just an hour ago, sent a chill down my spine. Exquisite Escapes, $180. I Googled the name and froze. It wasn't a restaurant or a hotel. It was a private members-only club in the next city over. The kind of place you needed an invite to join. A luxury lifestyle experience, the website boasted, with vague promises of exclusivity, discretion, and unforgettable nights. I wanted to give Melanie the benefit of the doubt. Maybe it was just a venue for the networking dinner she'd mentioned. But something about it didn't sit right. My heart pounded as I clicked through the site, trying to piece together what kind of place this was. That's when I noticed the gallery. The photos weren't explicit, but they didn't need to be. Elegant lighting, couples draped in masks, suggestive poses in richly decorated rooms. It was clear this wasn't just a fancy restaurant. I slammed my laptop shut, my thoughts racing. Was this where Melanie was tonight? Was this her idea of networking? It took everything in me not to call her right then and there, but I didn't want to seem paranoid. What if I was wrong? What if I was reading too much into things? Still, I couldn't shake the gnawing suspicion. When she came home around 1 a.m., her cheeks were flushed, her lipstick slightly smudged, and she smelled faintly of a perfume I didn't recognize. "You're still up?" she asked, looking genuinely surprised as she set her purse down by the door. "Yeah, couldn't sleep," I said, trying to sound casual. "How was your dinner?" "It was fine," she replied, kicking off her heels. "Long, but productive." She avoided my eyes as she headed upstairs to change, and when she came back down in her pajamas, she climbed into bed without another word. I didn't push her. Not yet. But as I lay next to her, staring at the ceiling, I knew this was more than a slump. Something was wrong, and I was going to find out exactly what it was. The next day, I couldn't shake the unease from the night before. Melanie left for work as usual, kissing me goodbye and humming as she walked out the door. It was almost unnerving how normal she seemed, like nothing was out of the ordinary. I spent the morning distracted, barely focusing on my own work. By lunch, I decided I couldn't wait any longer. I needed answers. I started with the credit card statement. That charge at Exquisite Escapes stood out like a beacon, but it wasn't the only suspicious one. Over the past 3 months, there were multiple charges to boutique stores, spa appointments, and something called Venus Social. It wasn't the spending itself. Melanie had her own income, and we never fought about money. But the pattern was off. Normally, she'd share her excitement over purchases. She loved telling me about her finds. "Look at this dress I got on sale." Or, "These shoes were too cute to pass up." But lately, silence. No mentions, no "guess what I found?" Moments. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was looking at a paper trail. That night, when Melanie went to bed early, I found myself alone in the living room, staring at her purse. I hesitated, the guilt twisting in my stomach. We'd always trusted each other. I'd never snooped before, but something inside me snapped. I needed to know. I opened her purse and rifled through it. Lipstick, gum, receipts, and then I found it. A sleek black membership card with gold lettering embossed on the front. Exquisite Escapes. Member number 8236. My hands shook as I turned it over. On the back was a tagline. For the bold and uninhibited. I stared at it, my mind racing. This wasn't a networking dinner. This wasn't anything she'd ever told me about. I tucked the card back where I'd found it, careful not to disturb anything else, and sat down with my laptop. I needed to know more. It didn't take long to find people online talking about the club, anonymous forums, Reddit threads, even a few vague reviews on niche lifestyle blogs. The words exclusive events, private parties, and discretion guaranteed came up over and over again. Then I found the smoking gun. On one of the forums, someone had uploaded pictures from a recent event. Most faces were blurred, but one photo stopped me cold. It was Melanie. She was wearing a sleek red dress, standing next to a man with his arm around her waist. Her head was tilted back, laughing, her eyes half closed. Even with her face partially obscured by a mask, I knew it was her. My stomach churned as I stared at the screen. This wasn't just a suspicion anymore, this was proof. My wife was living a double life, and I was the fool who hadn't seen it. I closed my laptop, my hands trembling. Anger, humiliation, and heartbreak swirled in my chest, threatening to crush me. This wasn't just betrayal. This was a slap in the face, a complete disregard for everything we'd built together. And I wasn't going to let it slide. The next morning, I could barely look at Melanie without my stomach churning. Every smile she gave me felt like a slap, every word out of her mouth like a mockery. She had no idea I knew, no clue that the comfortable lie she'd been living was about to unravel. I decided to wait until she got home that evening. If I was going to confront her, I wanted her cornered, unable to brush me off with some rushed excuse. I spent the day stewing, running through 100 versions of the conversation in my head. By the time she walked through the door around 6 p.m., I was ready. "Hey," she said brightly, dropping her purse on the counter. "What's for dinner?" I didn't answer. I just sat at the kitchen table, laptop in front of me, staring at her. "What's wrong?" she asked, her smile faltering. "Sit down," I said, my voice flat. Her brows furrowed. "Daniel, what's going on?" "Sit down." Something in my tone must have scared her, because she obeyed, pulling out the chair across from me. "What is this about?" she asked, her voice wavering. I turned the laptop around so she could see the screen. The picture of her in the red dress was still open, as damning as it had been the night before. Her face went pale. "Explain," I said, my voice cold. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. For a moment, she just stared at the screen, her hands trembling slightly on the table. "It's not what it looks like," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Don't insult me," I snapped, the anger I'd been holding back bubbling to the surface. "That's you, Melanie. That's you at a party you never told me about, with a man I've never seen before. So tell me, what the hell is it, if not what it looks like?" She looked down, biting her lip. "It's just a social club," she said weakly. "A place to unwind. I didn't think it was a big deal." "Not a big deal?" I cut her off. "You've been lying to me for months, sneaking around, spending our money to unwind." I spat the word like it was poison. "Who is he?" "Daniel, please," she said, her voice cracking. "It's nothing. I swear, it's nothing. Don't lie to me." I slammed my hand on the table, and she flinched, her eyes filled with tears. I needed something, okay?" she said, her words tumbling out in a rush. "You're always so busy with work." And I felt, I don't know, invisible. The club, it was exciting, different. But it didn't mean anything. "It didn't mean anything?" I repeated, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "You've been sneaking off to God knows what, lying to my face, spending thousands of dollars, and it didn't mean anything?" She didn't answer. "Do you have any idea what this feels like?" I asked, my voice breaking. "To find out the person you've loved and trusted for years has been lying to you? Humiliating you? I never meant to hurt you," she said, her tears streaming down her face now. "Funny how that works," I said bitterly. "You didn't mean to hurt me, but here we are." For a moment we just sat there in silence. The air between us felt heavy, suffocating. "I'll stop," she said finally, her voice trembling. "I'll cancel the membership, cut contact with everyone. Please, Daniel, we can fix this." I stared at her, my heart pounding. Part of me wanted to believe her, to hold on to the life we'd built. But the image of her in that dress, laughing with another man, was burned into my mind. "No," I said, my voice firm. "You don't get to decide what happens next. Not this time." Her face crumpled, but I didn't care. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Melanie stayed in the guest room that night. She tried knocking on our bedroom door once, softly calling my name, but I didn't answer. I was too consumed by a mix of anger and humiliation to even look at her. Sleep didn't come easy. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her in that picture, laughing with a stranger while I sat at home like a fool. I replayed her excuses over and over. Her claims that it didn't mean anything. The gall of it. By morning, my anger had crystallized into something colder, sharper. If she thought she could brush this under the rug, she was dead wrong. Melanie left for work early, probably to avoid another confrontation. I sat at the kitchen table, sipping coffee and staring at her membership card, which I'd swiped from her purse. Exquisite escapes. Member number 8236. I had no doubt that the card was the key to unraveling her lies completely. She'd only admitted to what I already knew, and I had a sinking suspicion there was more, much more, that she hadn't told me. I picked up my phone and called my friend Marcus. Marcus and I went way back to when we were college roommates. He worked in cybersecurity, the kind of guy who could dig up anything on anyone with the right motivation. And I had plenty of that. "Marcus," I said as soon as he picked up, "I need your help." "Everything okay?" he asked, sounding concerned. "Not even close," I replied. "I need you to look into something for me. It's about Melanie." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "All right," he said finally. "What's going on?" I explained everything, the suspicious charges, the membership card, the photo. He didn't interrupt, but I could tell from his tone when he spoke that he wasn't surprised. "Man, I'm sorry," he said. I'll see what I can dig up on this club. Send me anything you have. I snapped a photo of the membership card and forwarded it to him, along with the link to the club's website. I need to know everything, I said. What they do, who they cater to, and anything you can find about her involvement. Got it, he said. Give me a day or two. After hanging up, I felt a flicker of hope. Marcus had never let me down before, and if anyone could uncover the truth, it was him. In the meantime, I started planning my next steps. This wasn't just about confronting Melanie anymore. It was about protecting myself. I scheduled a consultation with a divorce attorney, someone I'd found online with a reputation for being ruthless. If Melanie thought she could waltz out of this with half of everything I'd worked for, she was in for a rude awakening. I also started gathering evidence. I printed out the credit card statements, saved the photo of her from the forum, and backed up the screenshots of her membership card. Every detail mattered, and I wasn't going to leave anything to chance. By the time Marcus called me back 2 days later, I was ready for whatever he had to tell me. Daniel, he said, his voice serious, you're not going to like this. What did you find? The club, it's not just about parties. They offer, let's just say services. High-end escorts, swingers events, that kind of thing. It's all kept very hush-hush, but I found some leaked client lists online. He paused. Melanie's name is on one of them. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. There's more, Marcus continued. I found her email linked to a few event registrations. One of them was last week. Send me everything, I said, my voice cold. I already did, he replied. Check your email. I opened my laptop and clicked on the files he'd sent. As I scrolled through the evidence, the full extent of Melanie's betrayal hit me like a freight train. This wasn't just a one-time thing. She'd been lying to me for months, possibly years, living a double life right under my nose. And now it was my turn to act. I spent the rest of the evening going through the files Marcus had sent. Each piece of evidence added another layer of betrayal. Melanie wasn't just attending these events. She was fully immersed in the club's culture. There were email confirmations for private experiences, payments for premium memberships, and even correspondence with other members. It was all there in black and white. What hurt the most was the tone of her messages. She sounded excited, carefree, completely unlike the distant, stressed woman I'd been living with. While I'd been working late to provide for us, she'd been off living a fantasy, one that didn't include me. By the time I finished, my anger had transformed into something darker. She hadn't just betrayed me, she'd humiliated me. And she'd done it with zero regard for the vows we'd made, for the life we'd built together. But this wasn't just about my pain anymore. If Melanie thought she could get away with this, she was wrong. I decided to test just how far her lies went. The next morning, over breakfast, I casually brought up the idea of a weekend getaway. Hey, I was thinking, I said, keeping my voice light. We haven't had much time together lately. What if we took a trip next weekend? Just the two of us. Melanie froze for a fraction of a second before plastering on a smile. That sounds nice, she said, stirring her coffee. Let me check my schedule. I didn't miss the way she avoided my eyes. Later that day, I logged into the shared calendar app we used to keep track of our schedules. Sure enough, Melanie had blocked off the weekend with a vague note. Work commitment. Work commitment, my ass. I opened Marcus's files again, looking for the event registration he'd mentioned. There it was, an invitation-only masquerade party hosted by Exquisite Escapes. The date matched the weekend Melanie had claimed she was busy. I felt sick. This wasn't just a pattern, it was a lifestyle. That night, I stayed late at the office, telling Melanie I had an important project to finish. In reality, I was making arrangements of my own. I hired a private investigator, someone who specialized in uncovering infidelity. I sent him everything I had, the credit card statements, the photos, even the emails. Follow her, I told him. I want to know exactly where she goes and who she's with. He promised results within a week. In the meantime, I started laying the groundwork for my revenge. I wasn't just going to end things with Melanie. I was going to make sure she regretted ever thinking she could deceive me. This wasn't about being petty or vindictive. It was about reclaiming my dignity, about making sure she understood the full weight of her betrayal. By the time the weekend rolled around, I was ready to watch everything fall apart. The day of the masquerade party arrived, and I felt a strange calm settle over me. It was the kind of calm you feel before a storm, knowing chaos is inevitable but fully prepared for it. Melanie left the house around 5 p.m., claiming she had a last-minute client dinner to attend. She wore a sleek silver dress, paired with heels that clicked confidently against the floor as she walked out the door. "Don't wait up," she said with a smile. I watched her drive off, my jaw tight. My private investigator, Rob, was already in position, tailing her car. He'd sent me a message earlier in the day confirming his readiness, along with a promise, "I'll get you what you need." I didn't sit around waiting. Instead, I got in my own car and headed toward the venue. I wasn't going inside, that wasn't the plan. But I wanted to be close to see it for myself. The party was being held at a sprawling estate just outside the city, a gated property surrounded by tall hedges. Cars were already pulling into the driveway, most of them luxury models. I parked a safe distance away, out of sight, and texted Rob. "She's there." Rob, "Just arrived." Entered with a man. Mid-40s, black suit. No mask yet. "Stay close. I need photos." The minutes ticked by as I sat in my car, my hands gripping the steering wheel. I hated this. Hated waiting. Hated knowing she was in there with someone else. But I forced myself to stay focused. This wasn't just about catching her in the act. It was about setting the stage for what came next. Rob sent me a series of photos about half an hour later. The first showed Melanie stepping out of her car, the silver dress clinging to her like a second skin. She was smiling, her arm linked with the man Rob had mentioned. The second was a close-up of her entering the estate, her mask dangling from her fingers as she leaned in to whisper something to the man. The third was the most damning. A shot of her inside the grand foyer, her mask now on, laughing as the man pressed a hand to her lower back. My chest tightened as I stared at the images. There was no denying it now. Whatever shred of doubt I'd clung to was gone. I forwarded the photos to Marcus, along with a simple message. "Print these. I'll explain later." Then I texted Rob again. "Stay for an hour. Get what you can." Rob, "Understood." I drove home after that, my mind racing with the next steps. Melanie would return later that night, probably with another lie on her lips. But this time I'd be ready. By the time she walked through the door around midnight, I was sitting in the living room, the photos printed and laid out on the coffee table. "Hey," she said, sounding surprised to see me. "You're up late." I didn't respond. I just gestured to the coffee table. "What's this?" she asked, walking over. Her face paled as she took in the images. She looked up at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. "Care to explain?" I asked, my voice cold and steady. She stammered, her eyes darting between the photos and my face. It's not what it looks like." "Really?" I said, leaning back in my chair. "Because it looks a lot like you've been screwing around behind my back. So please enlighten me. What is it, exactly?" For the first time, Melanie didn't have an immediate answer. Her mask of confidence cracked, and I saw a panic flicker in her eyes. But this was only the beginning. Melanie stared at the photos, her face pale, her hands trembling. I let the silence hang between us, heavy and suffocating, until she finally broke. "I can explain," she whispered. "Then explain," I said, my tone sharp. She opened her mouth, then closed it, as if struggling to find the words. When she finally spoke, her voice was weak, almost pleading. "It wasn't supposed to be like this. I needed something different, something exciting." "Something exciting?" I repeated, my anger bubbling to the surface. "You mean betraying me and sneaking off to a sex club with God knows who?" "It's not like that," she said quickly, tears welling in her eyes. "It's just, after all these years, I felt like we were stuck, like we'd become boring." "Boring?" I said, my voice cold. So your solution was to humiliate me? To lie to my face, month after month, while you ran off to your little playground. I didn't think you'd understand, she said, her voice breaking. You're damn right I don't understand, I snapped. Because instead of talking to me, your husband, you decided to blow thousands of dollars on this bullshit and act like it's normal. I'm sorry, she whispered, tears streaming down her face now. I didn't mean to hurt you, Daniel. I swear. I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. Didn't mean to hurt me? Melanie, you've been sneaking off to sleep with strangers and lying about it for months. How do you think that feels? She started sobbing, her shoulders shaking. But I didn't feel sorry for her. Not anymore. I need the full story, I said, leaning forward. How long has this been going on? Who else is involved? Tell me everything. Through her tears, she started talking. It had started over a year ago, she admitted, when one of her friends introduced her to Exquisite Escapes. At first, it was just casual, attending a few events out of curiosity, enjoying the atmosphere. But it quickly escalated. The exclusivity, the thrill of anonymity, it had sucked her in. She denied sleeping with anyone at first, but when I pressed her, her story fell apart. It was just once, she said. Maybe twice. Don't lie to me, I warned, my voice deadly calm. I've seen the emails, Melanie. I've seen the guest lists. You've been signing up for these events for months. Her face crumpled, and she buried her face in her hands. All right, she said, her voice muffled. It's been more than that. I don't know how many times. The admission hit me like a punch to the gut, but I didn't let it show. And the man in the photo? I asked, gesturing to the printout. Who is he? She hesitated, then shook her head. I don't know his name, she said softly. It's all anonymous. That's the point. I stared at her, disbelief and disgust coursing through me. You don't even know their names, I said, my voice dripping with contempt. Daniel, please, she said, reaching for me. I know I messed up, but we can fix this. We can go to therapy, start fresh. I pulled away from her, standing up. Don't touch me, I said coldly. You don't get to act like we're on the same side here. You destroyed this marriage, Melanie. Not me. She broke down completely then, sobbing into her hands. But I didn't feel pity. I felt rage. I'm filing for divorce, I said, my voice steady. And trust me, you're going to regret every single choice you made. Her sobs grew louder, but I didn't stay to listen. I grabbed my keys and walked out the door, leaving her to face the wreckage she'd created. This wasn't just about ending the marriage anymore. It was about making sure she understood what betrayal cost. I didn't go back home that night. I drove aimlessly for hours, replaying Melanie's confession over and over in my head. Every word, every tear, felt like a knife twisting in my chest. But beneath the pain was something else, cold determination. Melanie thought she could cry her way out of this, that an apology would be enough to make me forget her betrayal. She had no idea what was coming. The next morning, I met with my divorce attorney, a woman named Eleanor who came highly recommended for her ruthless approach. I laid out everything, Marcus's findings, the photos, Melanie's confession. This is going to be messy, Eleanor said, flipping through the evidence. But with this, we can push for an overwhelming advantage. You'll walk away with everything, and she'll be lucky to keep the clothes on her back. Good, I said. Eleanor nodded. First, we'll file the paperwork and serve her. But if you're serious about making her regret this, we'll need to take it a step further. What do you mean? You've built a reputation in your community. A business owner, a respectable husband, she said. She's the one who tarnished that. Public opinion can work in your favor, especially if we handle this right. Her words sparked an idea, and I spent the rest of the day putting my plan into motion. First, I sent Marcus another message. Me. Need help setting up a public website. Anonymous, secure. Marcus. What for? Me. Trust me. You'll love it. By the evening, the site was live. It was a simple page, tastefully designed, but its content was damning. Photos from the masquerade, screenshots of Melanie's emails, and a timeline of her betrayal, all presented with cold, clinical precision. The site wasn't about revenge for revenge's sake. It was about exposing the truth, about making sure Melanie couldn't spin her lies or gaslight me any longer. I shared the link with a select few people, our closest friends, mutual acquaintances, even a few colleagues who had always sung Melanie's praises. The fallout was immediate. My phone buzzed with messages all night. From Sarah, a mutual friend, Daniel, "I'm so sorry. I had no idea. She's disgusting." From another friend, "She was always fake. You deserve so much better." From her coworker, "We'll be talking to HR tomorrow. This is unacceptable." By the next morning, the site had started circulating beyond my control. People were sharing it on social media, adding their own commentary and outrage. Melanie's carefully constructed image was crumbling in real time. I didn't regret it, not for a second. The final piece of the plan came when Rob, my private investigator, sent me a new batch of photos. They were from the masquerade party. More intimate, more incriminating than the first set. I forwarded the pictures to Eleanor with a note. "Add these to the divorce filing." Melanie wouldn't just lose me. She'd lose her reputation, her dignity, and everything she thought she could take from me. This was only the beginning. The day Melanie was served with divorce papers was the day her world truly began to collapse. I made sure it happened at her workplace during a staff meeting, no less. She was in the middle of presenting something to her team when the process server walked in and handed her the envelope. According to a coworker who texted me later, she turned pale as she opened it, her hands trembling. She left the meeting immediately and didn't return for the rest of the day. That night, she tried calling me repeatedly, but I ignored every call. I didn't want to hear her excuses or apologies. She'd made her choices, and now she had to live with the consequences. The public exposure was doing its job, too. The anonymous website had gained traction, with people in our community sharing it widely. It didn't take long for it to reach her family. Her younger sister, Emily, called me a few days later, furious. "Daniel, what the hell is wrong with you?" she snapped. "Excuse me?" I said, my voice calm. "This website, how could you do this to Melanie? She's devastated." "Devastated," I said, laughing bitterly. "You think I care about her feelings after what she's done? She betrayed me, Emily. She lied, cheated, and humiliated me. I'm just making sure people know the truth." "She's still your wife," Emily said, her tone softer now, almost pleading.
No, irraplia.
"She stopped being my wife the moment she walked into that club." Emily didn't have a response to that, and I hung up before she could argue further. Meanwhile, Melanie's carefully curated life was crumbling. Her job was the first to go. Her employer couldn't ignore the growing scandal, especially after the photos from the masquerade surfaced. They framed it as a mutual separation, but everyone knew the truth. Her friends began distancing themselves, too. Those who hadn't already seen the website were confronted with it eventually, and their reactions were unanimous. "She's toxic," one of our mutual friends texted me. "You're better off without her." The final blow came when her family turned on her. Her parents, who had always adored me, were horrified by the revelations. They left me a voicemail apologizing for her behavior, saying they'd raised her better than this. "She's going through something," her mother said, her voice heavy with disappointment. "But we understand why you're doing what you're doing." For Melanie, the isolation was devastating. She tried reaching out to people, begging for support, but most either ignored her or told her outright that they couldn't condone her actions. Her desperation grew with each passing day. She even showed up at my office once, unannounced, looking disheveled and on the verge of tears. "Daniel, please," she said, standing in the lobby as my receptionist looked on awkwardly. "We need to talk." "There's nothing left to say," I replied coldly. "I made a mistake," she pleaded. "A terrible mistake, but we can fix this. I'll do whatever it takes." I stared at her, the woman I had once loved, and felt nothing but disgust. "This isn't something you can fix, Melanie," I said. "You didn't just ruin our marriage. You ruined yourself." And now you're facing the consequences. Her face crumpled, but I didn't stay to watch. I walked away, leaving her standing there, a shell of the woman she used to be. As the days passed, I focused on finalizing the divorce and ensuring every detail worked in my favor. Melanie's life, on the other hand, continued to spiral. She moved out of our house after my lawyer sent her a formal notice to vacate. It wasn't a pretty scene. The day she packed her things, I stayed out to avoid any confrontation, but she left behind a scrawled note on the kitchen counter. "Daniel, I'm sorry. I'll regret this for the rest of my life. I know I deserve this, but I still hope one day you can forgive me." I crumpled it and tossed it in the trash without a second thought. Meanwhile, the private investigator's work uncovered even more damning evidence. He tracked down a few of Melanie's past partners from the club, men who were all too willing to spill the details of their encounters once they learned about the scandal. Their accounts painted an even darker picture of her behavior. She wasn't just attending these events passively. She was actively seeking them out, messaging people directly, and arranging private meetings outside of the club. I added their testimonies to the growing pile of evidence my lawyer was building. By the time we filed the official divorce petition, it was airtight. There was no way Melanie could contest it or walk away with more than the bare minimum. But I wasn't done yet. I decided to make one final move to ensure she couldn't escape the fallout of her actions. Using the anonymous website Marcus had created, I reached out to a few local reporters who thrived on community gossip. At first, they were hesitant to touch the story. It was messy, personal, and involved a private club. But when I provided them with sanitized versions of the photos and proof of Melanie's spending habits, they couldn't resist. Within days, articles began popping up on local blogs and news sites. Headlines like, "Revealed, Local Arts Organizers' Double Life Exposed, Betrayal and Scandal, The Mask Behind the Masquerade." The public backlash was immediate and brutal. Melanie became the subject of online ridicule, her name trending on local forums and social media. People dissected every detail of her actions, offering their opinions on her betrayal and my retaliation. Some called me cruel, saying I should have kept the matter private. But most applauded me, seeing my actions as justified. Through it all, I felt no guilt. Melanie had made her choices, and now the world knew exactly who she was. A week later, I received an email from her. Subject: "One last chance. Daniel, I don't know how to begin this, except to say I'm sorry. I know I've hurt you in ways I can't ever undo, and I don't expect you to forgive me. But I'm begging you, please take down the website. Please stop the articles. I've lost everything. My job, my friends, my family. I don't even recognize myself anymore. I know I deserve this, but I can't take it anymore. Please, Daniel, just let me go. Melanie." I stared at her message for a long time, considering my response. Part of me wanted to ignore her entirely, to let her stew in the mess she'd made. But another part of me saw an opportunity, a way to solidify my victory. I finally replied. Subject: "You made your bed. Melanie, you're right. You do deserve this. But I'm not a monster, and I don't want to carry this fight forever. If you sign the divorce papers without contesting anything, I'll consider taking down the website and ending the articles. But understand this, you've burned every bridge, and there's no coming back from this. I'll never forgive you, Daniel." Her response came less than an hour later. A simple "I agree." Melanie signed the divorce papers the next day, quietly and without any fanfare. She didn't try to argue or negotiate for a better deal. She knew there was no point. I walked into my lawyer's office later that afternoon, where Eleanor greeted me with a satisfied smile. "She didn't contest a single clause," Eleanor said, handing me the documents. "You'll keep the house, the majority of your savings, and all your business assets. She's walking away with the bare minimum." I nodded, staring at the papers. The sight of her signature at the bottom felt like the closing of a long, painful chapter. "Good," I said. Eleanor leaned forward, her voice softening. "You've won, Daniel. I hope this gives you the closure you need." I didn't reply. I wasn't sure if this was closure or just the end of one battle and the beginning of another. True to my word, I began dismantling the website and contacted the reporters who had run the articles. I didn't do it for Melanie, I did it for myself. Keeping the website active felt like dragging out the war, and I was ready to move on. But even as the articles disappeared and the site went offline, the damage was done. Melanie's reputation was in tatters, and the community wouldn't forget what she'd done anytime soon. The next time I saw her was 2 weeks later. She showed up at the house unannounced, looking thinner and more worn than I'd ever seen her. "I came to get the last of my things," she said softly, not meeting my eyes. I nodded and stepped aside to let her in. As she moved through the house, packing up her remaining belongings, the silence between us was heavy. I wanted to say something, to ask if she truly understood the depth of what she'd done, but I couldn't find the words. Finally, as she stood at the door with her bags, she turned to me. "I don't expect you to believe me, but I am sorry," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "For everything." I stared at her, searching for any trace of the woman I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. But all I saw was a stranger. "I hope you find whatever you're looking for," I said, my voice cold. She nodded, her eyes glistening with tears, and walked out the door without another word. For the first time in months, I felt a strange sense of peace. The storm was over, and I could finally begin rebuilding my life. After Melanie left for the last time, the house felt quieter, emptier, but also lighter. I took down the wedding photos, packed away mementos, and started clearing the clutter she'd left behind. The divorce finalized quickly, thanks to her compliance. I kept the house, the savings, and my business. Melanie's new life, from what I heard, was confined to a small apartment across town, where she tried to stay out of the public eye. I didn't check on her, nor did I care to. Instead, I focused on myself. I took up boxing at the gym, poured my energy into growing my company, and even reconnected with old friends I hadn't seen in years. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. Melanie had been the storm, and now the calm had come. As the weeks turned into months, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened. Melanie's betrayal had shattered me, but it also forced me to reevaluate my life. I realized I'd been blind, too caught up in work and routine to notice the cracks forming in our marriage. That didn't excuse her actions, but it reminded me to pay closer attention to what mattered most in life: loyalty, honesty, and self-respect. For the first time, I felt grateful she was gone. She'd shown me exactly who she was, and I'd made sure she couldn't hide behind lies anymore. The future was mine now, and I intended to make the most of it. In the end, I learned that betrayal doesn't have to define you. It can destroy you if you let it, but it can also be a catalyst for change. I sold the house and moved into a modern loft downtown, a fresh start to match my new outlook. The scars Melanie left behind would always be there, but they no longer controlled me. When people asked about the divorce, I didn't shy away from the truth. I told them I'd fought for my dignity, and I'd won. If I had one piece of advice for anyone in my shoes, it would be this: never let betrayal break you. Use it, learn from it, and make damn sure you come out stronger on the other side.